missed you guys. I visited here right before Christmas for a service. Last winter, you may not have noticed me, I had a long beard and everything, and I was incognito. But speaking of Christmas, I got a friend, and right before Christmas, like 3 weeks before Christmas, he called his oldest daughter and he said, listen, he said, I've got some bad news for you. Mom and I are getting divorced. And she said, what? She said, we've been together for 43 years. Why would you be getting divorced now? You're in your late 60s. And he said, well, things just not going that well, and we're not happy. She said, look, Christmas is in 3 weeks. Let me get a plane ticket. I'll come out and let us come out, and I will come out and I'll talk to you about this. Can you just wait until then? And he said, well, we'll see, maybe. So anyway, the older daughter called her younger sister, and she said, look, Mom and Dad are talking about getting divorced. Could you call them? So she said, oh my gosh, of course. So the younger daughter called, and she said, Dad, what is going on? 43 years. And he said, well, we're just not happy, and things aren't going well. She said, well, Sis is coming out. She said, I'll get a plane ticket, I'll come out. The four of us can sit down together, and we'll talk about this and try to work this out. Can you just wait until we get there? So he said, all right, we'll wait. So he gets off the phone and he walks into the living room, and his wife is sitting on the couch, and she said, who are you on the phone with, dear? And he said, well, love, I have some good news. Both of the children are coming out for Christmas. And they paid for their own airline tickets. From Jonah 1:1-3, I know everybody knows the story, but there's a reason for it all. But I just want to go into the 1-3, short part. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed toward Tarshish. It's a hard word to say. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed to Tarshish to flee from the Lord. So there's a comment. This is a commentary Bible for me, a study Bible. But I also really like the commentary, so I want to read that. The chapter records the commissioning of a very reluctant prophet. The call was clear. The source of the call was a distinct word of the Lord. The destination was Nineveh. The message was repent. How much more clearly could the Lord have spoken? Jonah's response was anything but positive. He got on the first ship he could find and went in the opposite direction, as he attempted to run from God. But Jonah learned a lesson many of us learn the hard way. You can't run away from God, who is everywhere present. He sees everything exactly where you are. And I don't like this last part. He'll catch you every time. I don't necessarily agree with that part, but the point is that he's aware of where you are and what you're doing. And for not everybody, the call is clear. I've never really had a problem doing the ministry that the Lord has asked me to do. The reason I picked Jonah today is because I've been doing a little bit of the Jonah myself. I did prison ministry for 25 years. I have spoken in India for a month at a time to thousands of people twice, and other places that I've witnessed and done sermons and services at. But first time, I had never done a service until I came here. And the first time I was asked, almost immediately I started getting nervous and anxious and having anxiety about it. And the pastor asked me, why do you think that is? And I said, the only thing I can figure is God's afraid that I'm going to do more damage up there than good. And he doesn't want me up there, because why would I feel uncomfortable? Now, since a very early age, I've had the gift of speaking boldness. Now, the only reason I say that is because I denied Christ once, speaking to another person, and I felt condemnation for it afterwards, and I knew it. So I prayed and asked the Lord to give me the gift of speaking boldly. And after that, I never had a problem getting up and speaking in front of people. So it was kind of odd that this happened to me, and I was uncomfortable, and I thought, well, maybe it'll get better. Anyway, I did 3 services 2 years ago here, and each one I was nervous. I'd wake up at night thinking about it, practicing the sermons, and my wife was going crazy. Last year I did 2, and it was better. And somebody told me it gets better, anyway, I did a couple, and still anxiousness and nervousness. So when Francine called me this spring and said, could you do a supply service for her? I said, no, I'm not going to be available. That was basically me being Jonah, going in the other direction, because I had it in my heart that God wanted me to do it. But I wasn't feeling the peace, so I figured if I'm not getting the peace from God, then maybe He doesn't want me to do it. Well, Jonah wasn't too happy either. He didn't have a peace about doing it. But God still wanted him to do it. There's numerous references in the Bible to people who had to go and do things that they didn't want to do. So it's not always true that God will give you a comfort and a peace to do something. So I told her no in the spring, but I borrowed a hymnal and a prayer book last summer, and I had said to her, it's okay if I take this home, and she said, yes, make sure you bring it back. You don't know how many times I tried to bring that book back here, and no one was here. I came by once, there were 2 cars in the parking lot, I was all excited, I knocked on the door was locked, nobody came. Other times I'd come by, there were cars here, but I didn't have the books with me. So it was just a nightmare. So now it's like, almost a year later, I've still got the 2 books. They happen to be in my truck. A few weeks ago, I had just finished having dinner with my wife. Normally I don't go out after dinner. I get pretty lazy and I just want to watch a little TV, play some video games or something. And I said, let's go for a hike down the North River. And she said, really? And I said, yeah. She said, all right. So we went down the North River. Of course, we go right down here, and we go over the North River. We hiked around down there. The shad run is in May. It's a fish that goes out into the ocean, comes out, and a few moving around. It was neat to see. We finished there, and we're coming back, and I see lights on in the church and a lot of cars in the parking lot. So I said, oh, somebody's there. I can drop the books. So she said, okay. So I pulled in. I went inside. I see a few faces that I recognize have a meeting in the hall. Of course, I didn't want to disturb, so I said, I'm sorry to disturb you, I'm just dropping off a couple of books. And Francine, I guess nobody knew who I was, she comes out and she said, can I help you? And I said, no, I'm just dropping off a couple of books. And she goes, David? And I said, yeah. And she said, we're having a meeting right now about getting a new pastor and getting somebody for supply. Would you be willing to come in?
I was struck by the iron.
The Lord pursues you, and I don't believe in coincidence. I believe things happen for a reason. Not that there aren't coincidences, but sometimes it's hard to ignore. Anyway, so yeah, so I told her yes. So I'm here, and for better or for worse, you got me. Before we start the closing hymn, I just want to tell you, I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, I was afraid I was going to go over too much, doing the video and a little talk and everything over. So you got lucky. I cut my sermon short. But that's okay. I'm sure there's other things you guys can do today. Worship isn't an amount of time that you spend. I try to go throughout the day thinking about the Lord in different times, praying for different things. So there isn't a particular thing. When I was in India, we started a service, roughly started it at 7:30 in the evening, and it went until almost 11:30 at night. So it was 4 hours with people as far as I could see, down the road in these, glarish lights kind of. And they sat on the ground. And some of the elders sat in white plastic chairs in the back, but most of the people sat on the ground full service. I don't think I saw more than 7 or 8 people get up to use the bathroom in 3 hours, 3.5 hours of preaching. So they had about 5 preachers there that night, or maybe 4, and I was the guest speaker. So I said to the man that was in charge of this whole thing and invited me and all that, I said, I see you have other speakers. And he said, yes, but you're the guest speaker. And I said, well, how long do I have to speak? And he said, well, Brother David, you're the guest speaker. You can speak as long as you want. So knowing it was going to be 4 hours, I thought I'd be, a little wise. And I said, so if I speak for 3 hours, that's okay. And he said, oh yes, of course, Brother David. And I said, no. I said, if I can do 20 minutes, I'm doing great. I said, I was kidding. I didn't mean it. He said, no, you can speak as long as you want. And I had an interpreter, and I spoke for about 20 minutes, but sometimes I still get used to the time it takes me to do different things.